Welcome back to Green Chat, where today we're going to be taking a closer look at an upcoming MMO, Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. My name is Cleeze, and let's get started. Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Green Chat, if you're new to Green Chat, this is a place where you can ask me questions, I can give you my opinion, to hopefully formulate your own on the new upcoming MMO, Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. On today's little show, we have a bunch of questions from you guys or comments. So with that, we're going to get kicked off. Or before we get to those comments, I just wanted to cover some quick points that I said I would recap you guys on in previous videos. So if you're new here, it's going to be like, oh, a little cherry on the top. Not really. Maybe it'll be more like whipped cream. So the things I wanted to cover before we jump into the comments was I was going over some videos that Brad had put out some time ago. I kind of feel silly for even missing it. One's about the auction house. So auction houses, I think I've made like a couple videos on that, and or at least covering that in my opinion, and would say I'd share more once we heard more from Visionary Realms. One of the things that Brad did share adamantly was that he would like the auction house systems, or if there's auction houses in the games. He is really a huge fan of the EQ tunnel, or the players driving the economy and how it kind of builds on itself. So one thing he did mention is if there is auction houses, and Visionary Realms will do anything to support the ecosystem and the economy in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, but they're going to try to keep it true to their core, principles, which is that we have to build these systems, so to speak. They're not going to really guide our hands in any given direction, or they'd prefer not to. So what he mentioned was if there is auction houses, let's say you have two different cities, you can go there and post things at that city, potentially at an auction house or a bazaar or something like that. But you won't be able to access it globally. So you'll have to go to City A to get things that are posted in City A, and then go to City B to get things posted in City B. What this would drive, potentially, is an area that's more economically, robust or worth your effort to travel distances to post your items and stuff like that. So that was one thing. Another thing was grouping. He had mentioned, so in all the live streams that we've seen so far with the pre-alpha and the development team, I think it's been a team of 6 in each stream, but he did mention they're toying around with the idea of the base group size being between 6 and 8. And the reason for that is you don't feel forced to be like, oh, we need a warrior, we need a healer, we need a CC'er, we need some DPS. It'll allow a lot more flexibility, like, oh, we can have a tank and then a co-tank for when things get crazy. And along those other lines, you could say, let's say you have 6 people in your party, it's not a big burden to add 7 or 8, because 8's a pretty robust number. And then if you got some buddies, somebody who's new to the game and a rather experienced group of friends, they don't necessarily need to be that overachieving or amazing. Like, you don't have to meet a requirement to join certain groups doing certain content, because this content might only really require these key facets in your group. Maybe it's like 4 people or 5 or maybe even 6. Then you'll have some room left over to add a couple of extra buddies, or somebody who's like, hey, you got any room? So that was really neat. So with that, let's crack into some of your guys' questions this week and get this train rolling. All right, so first up, we have a question from David. David's asking, does Pantheon come in the form of a human so I can introduce her, him, hun to my parents and finally be happy and feel complete in my life? So I did some digging on this, and from what I understand, Visionary Realms is at least giving one of their pledge statuses the ability to create a cryogenically frozen person that is taken from the DNA of the entire development team. And I guess it's given away kind of at a raffle to the VIPs, so to speak, / investors. So if you do decide to do that, David, you will have that opportunity and something that at least one of us will be able to really look forward to. To rebound off that first comment, Drew is also asking, so adding to David's comment, my question is, if he introduces, it's actually her, he, him, hun, hum, to his parents, why didn't the parents of the baby bear eat Goldilockses before the wolf from Little Red Riding Hood before the MMORPG did 10 attack to save Goldilocks? How did the wolf gain enough mana in such little time? Asking for a friend. So clearly, at least in this situation, if the her, he, him, hun is from the combined DNA of the development team, there is no question that his ability to regen mana is going to be out of control. And then furthermore, he's probably going to have the combined abilities of all the classes, or her, he, him, Hun will have the combined abilities of all the classes in the game, and will be able to cast Clarity and at least, you know, cannibalize all the abilities to get the mana back really quickly and get the job done. So as you guys can see, I take my comments very seriously. So if you ask me a question, boom, it's going to get answered. Do I know what just happened? I have no idea. Hopefully you do, but there you have it. So next up, we have a comment from Kathy Coleman. Kathy Coleman's asking really not a question, it's more of a comment. She's mostly grilling me. Not grilling me, she's like, what's wrong with you, man? You didn't bring this up? And I agree with her. So Kathy Coleman's saying, one differentiating tool you did not mention is which skills players of varying levels may or may not have for their class, since some of those will require exploring specific parts of the world. So what is going on here, what Kathy's really wanting me to bring to the surface in Green Chat, make it a big old party balloon explosion excitement time, is basically when you hit certain levels, you hit 35, 45, whatever level you hit, you're not just going to get a bunch of skills populating your skill book. You're not going to get a bunch of skills when you go to your trainer. You're going to have to go out in the world and find them. You're going to have to combine, casters are going to have to combine pieces of tomes and stuff like that, parchments, to create these spells that they get from drops, potentially for their better spells. There will be some basic spells from the trainers, but for the most part, it's going to be your awesome spells are going to be found out in the world by players. Along with the melee classes, will also be experiencing that. And then Pantheon, as mentioned, they're going to be placing some special NPCs out in the environment that you'll be able to you know, hunt for or explore to, however you want to do it, or however it's done, and really just make it that more engaging to advance your character. Furthermore, it's really going to set you apart. So when you hit like a level 45, you're not going to be able to sit there and just constantly focusing on leveling your character. Otherwise, by the time you get to level 50, you're going to be using level 30 spells, for example, for some of your repertoire, which is not going to be cool, and people are going to be like, what are you doing, man? So it gives you another way to not so much linearly progress your character and more horizontally go out and have to achieve different things to improve yourself and get what you need to get the job done. And that's another way for content to really be not so much locked, but really leveraged in the sense to where, you know, a level 50 area might be more geared towards very geared out or more basically filled out characters or rounded out tunes versus not so rounded out tunes, which will make your, you know, exploration process much more exciting or much more in depth, because you have to do much. I'm saying the word much a ton, but basically it just makes the world more appealing to go explore. You get to do more stuff for more to get more happy about being moresomed. And I'm going to stop using the word more now. But basically, I think you guys know what I'm saying. So thank you, Kathy. And let's move on to the nexties. Nexties, man. Let's take a selfie. So now we're going to move on and address some questions from a lovely man or woman. I think it's a man. I get this feeling that he's a man because his name is Crimson. It feels very male to me. It could be a woman. But anyway, Crimson asked me a bunch of questions, and they're pretty cool, pretty awesome. Excuse my clicking. And we're going to be addressing these probably over the next couple episodes because some of them are pretty depthy, and I would like to spend the time to address them. Or maybe I'll just rapid fire. I don't know. I don't know how long it's going to take me to get through each one, but here we go. So Crimson's asking, do you see there being a branch out in classes? Example, warrior getting a spec in two-handed weapons, tank, or dual wield. Why do you feel this way? If so, should it be a thing at launch or later in the game? So it's kind of a two-pronged question. It's kind of like what my opinion might be or what I would like to see, I guess, and then what I think Pantheon will do. So do I see there being a branch out in classes? I don't, as far as like specs like two-handed weapons, tank, or dual wield, or like a cleric being able to go more like damage base with smiting spells and undead attacks and stuff like that, or more specialized in that direction. Now, I really haven't covered this thing as far as colored mana goes, or I guess there's specialized spells in the game where you need certain colored mana to perform these spells, which allows you to subclass your character a little bit more in depth. But I don't see them so much adding specs to characters. So let's use the warrior example. I think you'll be able to throw in a two-hander, or at least in the past titles that they've created. You really can do anything as any class, which I kind of like. I'm not a huge fan of specs. I mean, I am in certain games, like they work out great in plenty of games out there. But as far as Pantheon goes, I like the fact that you have the freedom. If a two-handed weapon drops, it'll work for you well if it's statted well, and it's great for you if you're a warrior. So let's say you're using a sword and board type situation, and then a two-hander drops where you're like, dang, the stats on that thing, oh sweet, and then you want to start tanking with a two-hander. I mean, it makes sense if it's a great sword, because plenty of people did that back in the day in the medieval times on the battlefield. Not that that's relevant at all, but whatever. And then you do wield. You need to grab more aggro, or you need to have better aggro management. You have amazing armor. Do wield it up, man. So I don't see the need for branching out into certain subsects of your class. Like this is more of like the guardian or the tank based warrior. This is the DPS based warrior. I would like to see this. You have all the skills, and depending on what you're wearing will really drive that persona, or that type of role you're trying to fill. So if you're like a co-tank and you're going to be doing a lot of fights that require more damage, you'd be able to throw in weapons that you've worked for to meet that need versus tanking gear. So that would be kind of neat to have to collect different types of gear to suit different needs, especially depending on the class you are. Obviously, a rogue is going to be very damage centric, so certain classes are going to have to deal with this more than others. You're not going to see a rogue running around with whatever, having to need like 6 different types of daggers. Oh, maybe so, but in certain stances, but I wouldn't see it too much. Why do I feel this way? I just like to see you be able to throw anything on your character and have it work. So if you're a tanking warrior, you're not restricted to like, I can't use this because of these reasons. Or if you're a caster and you want to use, if you're a cleric and I guess it changes depending on what class we're talking about. It also gives your class's identity like kind of a split personality, which I don't like. I like having, if you're playing a cleric, you're playing a healer, that's what you're doing. I could see the need for maybe like you want to break out of being a healer, but I think that's where alts would come in. And then again, I think clerics will have pretty good spells against First Undead. But for the most part, I like people being very centric in their roles, and I think that's what we're trying to go for here. So I think each class will be a warrior. There will be no subset, different types of trees you can go down that would change the way it plays. And then, granted, you might have better abilities that are usable when you're main tanking versus off tanking and stuff like that, but I think it should go across the spectrum, and that you should have access to anything at any moment, any time. And depending on what spells you memorize or skills you dedicate to your hotbar would dictate what role you're filling out and what you can do and how cool you are. So that's why I feel that way. Now, should this be thing at launch or later in the game? Again, I don't really like the spec thing, so it should be at launch. The way it launches, your character should be that way, and that's really cool because certain games out there, you pick a class because the way the description goes and stuff like that, it's really neat to you. And then what happens is, a great example is, let's say you go with a shaman, and the shaman has like a damage tree, and then like a melee tree. I'm going to use World of Warcraft right now, for example, and then a healing tree. And then you really get forced into, oh, this shaman's damage. We want a healing shaman. You're not that. So you got to constantly be dealing with that. So when you pick your role, you are in the role you like to be. So if you picked the shaman to be what he is, or you picked the cleric to be what the cleric is, you get that throughout the entire experience of that character. I personally like that. Next, Crimson is commenting, when you pledge, most packages get 2 games included. Do you see there being a way for these 2 being able to port to one another to play together if they choose different races, like a single-use item to use or an in-game function? So I totally like this idea. I don't see it being a function in the game. I would hope it's going to be honest in alpha and pre-alpha and alpha and beta to really convince them, hey, this would be a great thing to have in the game. It's easy enough to put in there. You're going to run into plenty of times, though, where you make different races and then you port to each other and then you start getting killed because you go into the wrong city and it can kind of ruin things. So I could see it kind of creating a nut house for them, as far as not a nut house. I could see it kind of creating a weird problem for them as they're trying to deal with the launch of the game, and there's a bunch of new people to this game, and people are like, oh, play together, and then they port to each other, and they're like, whoa, and then one of them dies, and they can't get back to the body because they're all the way over, and who the heck knows where. And then they just get flooded with all these tickets of what the heck, we used our one-use item. And then if it's an in-game function, clearly that kind of breaks the what they're going for as far as travel being meaningful, because you can make characters, you know, but I don't know. I'd like to see it in the game somehow. I think this would be a cool function, even if it does get crazy for them as far as like tickets getting put in, like, yeah, what the heck, or it breaking or not working right. And I guess you could solve the issue where you die, like when you port, you will get bound to where you are. But again, that would create an issue if you ported to a terrible city. I guess you could put a thing in the game where if you were going to port to somebody that was in a clearly an opposing faction to what your character is able to coexist in, that it would be like, warning, this is going to happen. Are you sure you're going to go here and die forever? So there's definitely ways that can make that happen. And I personally would like to see this in the game. I think it's an awesome idea. We'll just have to see if we can convince them to put it in the game, because it makes a lot of sense. But to kind of recapitulate that, being able to port to each other with that function, these two games included are not so much like a refer a friend package or what you would usually see to be able to utilize this. It's just kind of two copies of the game. So at the same time, I can see the other side of the argument where it's just two copies of the game. It's not like they're bound to each other in any way. It's just it's a nice thing to have. And then part of the game is part of the experience is if you want to be this or that. You want to be an ogre and a human. That's what you want to be, and you got to deal with the consequences of being those races, and that's what's difficult to be those races. Versus if you played a race that's really secluded and difficult to level up at the beginning and ported to a more easier city and just kind of cheesed it, so to speak, would be kind of, that's not that cool. So the best way I think to get around this or to alleviate this if they don't put it into the game, personally, whoever has more time to play should make a character with the friend and level up in the same city, and then make the character you want to make if it's something different, and then play the game on your off time or the character on your off time till you're strong enough or till you're high enough level to really leave your surroundings and then go meet up somewhere out in the world. That would be the kind of, at least in my opinion, the way to get around not having that ability, which is inconvenient to say the least, but Pantheon isn't a game about convenience, to also say the most. Next, Crimson is asking, would you rather see specs per class to further progression in classes, or would you rather see additional classes add to the game alongside the ones that already exist at launch, excluding Necromancer and Bard? So this one again, I would definitely rather see extra classes added. I know there's already a ton of classes, but there's a few classes out there I think are really nifty and jifty that they've made in the past, like Beast Lord. Bam. But honestly, I don't know. Adding classes is one of those things that really gets kind of funky. But there's definitely room to expand. I think there's like 3 tanks, a couple of damages, some casters, and then some CCers. They definitely have room to expand on the amount of classes and make it relevant and make them competitive, I would think. Now, the issue with adding more classes is you need a way for that to work in the lore, which is easy enough with the way Terminus works, is how these races are being teleported to Terminus or appearing in Terminus or whatever. But I probably need to brush up on my lore before that comment could potentially make sense. But that's one of the biggest challenge I see, is transitioning a new class into the game. It's going to have to share armor with another class, so that if think about that ahead of time. So there's a lot of pre-planning that would need to go into play to really not cramp a class as far as its gear goes, and have it make sense, not just have it ride on the coattails of a different class, like having it follow like a ranger. Ranger uses a certain type of armor, and then just have another class that is going to use that same subset of armor, but be a completely different class in its nature, versus going through specs. Now, I would think it'd be cool. I know I've mentioned before about like iconic abilities and stuff like that, and I'm like, oh, there's not a great idea. And this is where I would see having iconic abilities ride more in the background, less in the foreground, would be a good idea. Is you could kind of give classes a certain type of spec with their iconic abilities. Like you could use different ones. It'd be kind of nifty, maybe to really change how your class plays in a certain way, or to go into a certain aura, or have certain spell sets that would really change your class and not necessarily give it a different spec, but kind of give you a different approach to how you engage in combat, like you know, more of a like a trap guy with rogue or whatever the case. Now they may already be doing all that with all these classes, but we'll have to see. Again, I'm not a huge fan of specs per class or specs in general, so I would prefer to see more classes added. But again, that would be kind of an interesting thing and a lot of work. So, but if I had to pick one, that's the one I would pick. That's what I would pick. Yeah. Yep. And as far as the history goes of these types of games and the games that Brad's been involved in, he definitely guaranteed has more classes under his, you know, in his little robe pockets of his wizard robe or whatever robe he wears. Maybe his shower robe or bath robe. He's got plenty of classes, I'm pretty sure, up his sleeve in his head, because, you know, that's what happens when you're creative. You're a creative, great-looking man. Just saying. All right, to break up our tempo, we're going to address a comment from somebody else. This one's from Arctic Critic. And Arctic Critic's asking, this is a really hard name to say, Arctic Critic is asking, when does this game come out? Come out. Boom. So to answer this one simply, we have no idea. Right now it's in pre-alpha. Alpha's, I think, shooting for later 2018. And once you get into alpha, things really start picking up the pace as far as what development has to go. So alpha and then beta usually take maybe 6 months, 8 months. There's timetables for these things, but I would say somewhere late 2019, early, mid 2019, 2020, 2025, probably like 2019. If I had to guess, it would be 2019, at least in some form or fashion. A lot of people are going to be in alpha and beta at that point, and then we're really going to know more, because usually things go great and there's, you know, they're really moving fast and they're not running into any major issues, or they hit beta or they hit alpha and they're like, oh my gosh, we have to redo all of this or all of that, or we still have all this world to build because we've been focusing on these issues or these bugs. So it's really hard to say, but if it goes smoothly, I'd say 2019. If it goes smoothly with a couple of hiccups, I'd say 2020. You know what I mean? That's probably what it's going to be. So that is the expected, what I would expect. That's not the expected. That's what I think the release date's going to be. Now, everybody else is their own critic and judge on that, Arctic Critic. So you let me know what you think, but that's what I think. And Balakaboom, we're back to Crimson. Crimson's asking, at what level on average would you like to see the need for grouping or at least duo to kill mobs? A thought on both. So the need for grouping, I really like level 4, level 5, level 7, those areas, depending on your class. And then that's initially when you first create your character, you're super weak, you have, you know, very little going on for you. And then you group up and then you start killing harder mobs and you're able to get more gear. And then you might be able to break out and solo some more and then go back in. And it's kind of a fluid or kind of this in and out of grouping and soloing depending on your class and your ability and what you're wearing. So at least duo mobs would be like 4 or 5, you know, 4 to 7. And then grouping, I like to see around like 10 to 15. And it's going to be longer to make levels in these games, so I'd say, I mean, maybe even 8, but you could group and be effective at 5, for example, but where you really need to group to actually kill the content you're trying to kill, I would say around like 10 would be a good spot to start. Personally, I think that's one of those milestones where you're like, oh man, now I really need to group. Awesome. And at least I would like to see grouping exist. I know Pantheon's going to be having the, what do you call it, the free-to-play, not free-to-play, but like trial version of the game. I would like to see grouping exist for the trial people, so they at least get a taste of what that is. So I think, I don't know how, they haven't mentioned how high you'll be able to level up a trial, so I think I would prefer it to be based on that, at least duoing and grouping to have to exist in the window of your trial. So if trial only goes up to 10, then I'd like to see duoing around 5 and then grouping around 8 would be nice. And if it goes higher, then just kind of increase that. But I think that's where it would make sense. And then they've mentioned after the trial period ends, like if it ends at level 15, level 16 is going to be like a, you know, a hot basket of eggs. Like it's not going to be something you could be like, I'm going to say, oh my God, what just happened? Now, I don't think they want you to jump off a cliff or like climb a mountain as far as like how the difficulty will scale after the trial period is over as far as levels go. But I know he's mentioned it's going to take a step up, a few steps actually, in difficulty once you, or this is their plan, once you exit out of that trial window as far as your level goes. All right, guys, and with that, I'm going to end it there. One thing I wanted to mention is recently Pantheon put out some new pre-alpha streams with CohhCarnage and Jim Lee, I think. Anyways, go over to, you can look up on, Pantheon Rise of the Fallen on YouTube, jump onto their YouTube and see those streams. They're pretty awesome, actually. They're coming a really long way, especially with how things look and how things interact, and it looks great. There's a lot of problems with one of the streams just getting kicked off, but that's just the nature of pre-alpha. That's just what happens. Boom. But they're super awesome. Definitely recommend you go check them out. As far as Green Chat goes, if you enjoyed what you saw, please like and subscribe to get any notifications for future uploads I do. And again, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll see you again really soon.